Welcome in to Payoff Pitch, Action Network's baseball betting podcast. We are presented by our friends at BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. Brendan Glasheen joining you here. And the Major League Baseball season is so close, we can almost taste it. It really is almost here. We're back with our division previews, where we'll go through all 6 divisions and discuss all the good stuff, win totals, futures, awards, and much, much more. Let's welcome in also our guests. For this episode, we're weaving all of the Action Network baseball guys into these episodes. So today, diving into the American League East, 2 of Action Network's best in Sean Zerillo and Charlie DiSturco. You can find, I'm going to plug this right away before I forget, Sean Zerillo, 2024 Major League Baseball betting guide. Excellent work. A lot more from Zerillo, but that betting guide is just a great way to sink your teeth back into the sport. That's available to you, Action Network app, actionnetwork.com. And Charlie DiSturco, during the season, will have the 777s this year, which will come out a couple times a week. Video version, written version, available to you there. So just to give you the rundown, a little bit of housekeeping here, how we're going to do this. We will have all 6 division previews released this week and then next week on Payoff Pitch. We'll do a long shots episode and an opening day preview. So those will be 2 separate episodes. And then during the season, Monday, Tuesday, Friday, the same deal as last year, Payoff Pitch to break down the slate for that given day. And by the way, 2 episodes out now, MLB offseason betting update and the player props episode, which was done earlier in the week. That was good stuff from the guys earlier in the week. You don't want to miss our coverage. So subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. Wherever you listen, please leave a 5-star rating and review. We appreciate the feedback, positive, negative, as long as it's 5 stars, if you can get yourself there. Okay, let's do it. American League East. I want to start with some whoppers. The New York Yankees are always a topic of discussion. Good, bad, ugly. And Sean Zerillo, you're into the ugly with the Yankees. I won't give away your pick right away, but you're down on the New York Yankees. That's a fair way to start this, right?
Yeah, I think there's certainly some downside with this roster, and it's just such a tough division. You know, I could see any of the top 4 teams, the Blue Jays, the Orioles, the Rays, or the Yankees coming out on top. We'll get to which of those teams I like a little bit later, but in terms of finding value, I do think there is value on the Yankees to miss the playoffs right now. Looking around the projection market, they're projected to win as high as 94 games for PECOTA, and PECOTA sees them winning the division by about 6 games, but everybody else thinks it's a dogfight and sees the Yankees only clearing off their competition by a game or a game and a half. So that is roughly what they were expected to do last year. There were a couple of projections that were higher in the Yankees, a couple that had them more in line with the rest of the division, but ultimately everybody saw them winning the division, and they still ended up missing the playoffs. Now, looking around the projection market, if you take an average composite projection, the Yankees to make the playoffs is around minus 344. I'm a bit lower on the Yankees, though, as we said. I project them closer to 92 wins. Their over-under is 93.5. So my fair odds on New York to make the playoffs, probably about minus 300. You can get as high as plus 340 on New York to miss. I think if they would have signed Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery, they probably would have done so by now. To me, it seems like one of those guys is likely to end up potentially in San Francisco to solidify the back end of their rotation. We're going to talk about NL West later this week. I'll definitely have some thoughts on the Giants making the playoffs. But in terms of the top of this division, I think the Yankees missing the playoffs is the only way I'm interested in betting them. I think there's other teams worth taking shots on from a divisional perspective. From an awards perspective, I think Aaron Judge and Juan Soto could potentially cannibalize each other. I think Soto should probably be the American League favorite for the MVP, considering Judge's injury history and the fact that he admitted in spring training that his toe injury is not something that's going to go away. He's going to have to manage it for the rest of his career. So it's difficult to project Judge for more than about 140 games over the course of a full season. The one awards bet I did place was Austin Wells to win Rookie of the Year. And he is a long shot, 71 or better, but he's going to play every day. He's going to start for the Yankees, and I think there's some playing time upside there as well. Only really projected for about 350 to 400 plate appearances. If he gets over 450, plays a full season, I think he's going to hit 15 home runs and finish as a 2 or 2.5 win player, getting that defensive value as a catcher. So Austin Wells as the Rookie of the Year in the American League. Big long shot, definitely guys I prefer, even guys I prefer in this division. But the only player prop I have in the Yankees for now.
Yeah, it's funny how Judge is more forthright about this injury after he got the bag, right? And had the record-breaking season a few years ago. Charlie DiSturco, your temperature of the New York Yankees entering 2024.
Yeah, I kind of have mixed feelings. I could see them absolutely rolling with all the additions they've tried to make, and I can see them also flopping, like we've seen year after year. Like Carlos Rodon, can he come back and stay healthy? Who knows? But the way that I like to attack this market, and I know Zarilla mentioned he thinks Soto and Judge might cannibalize each other, but I do think, and like you mentioned with Aaron Judge's toe injury, that Soto should be the outright favorite to win MVP, and I do like him as far as sprinkling on that 6-1 number. I mean, you look at the projection market, he's fourth in WRC plus for the Bat X on projections, second per ATC, which are two of the more trusted projections that I use, and then he's top 5 as far as WAR goes, and he's a durability player. He's a guy that hits in front of Aaron Judge, so he will be not pitched around. I think we're going to see him swing a bit more. I think he's going to get more hittable pitches too, with Judge waiting on deck. And I think the MVP, it's a big narrative. It's obviously the media votes on it. And if Juan Soto comes to New York and he hits 35 plus homers and he has 100 plus RBIs and he has an on base percentage of whatever, 410, 415, and the Yankees make the playoffs or win the division, I think they're going to side with giving the award to Soto over Judge. And I think that's kind of where we've already seen in the preseason the narrative kind of circulate around. And I think Juan is finally going to get it done. I bet him last year to win the MVP. That flop, but I think that this is another year that I'm going to keep investing in him with another guy that I also logged in the app for an MVP outright in a different division. But you look at his numbers, top percentile in hard hit rate. He's got an elite on base percentage. And at his floor, he's going to be top 10 in just about every major category, in my opinion, as long as he stays healthy. So willing to take a stab on him to win the MVP. Obviously, a bit of a public play. Everyone wants to see Juan Soto and everyone's on Juan Soto, but I think he should be the outright favorite. And then a quick player prop. Anthony Volpe over 24.5 stolen bases. He had 24 last year, and he had an on-base percentage of 283. And it's not like he's going to sit. Like, they're not going to opt to play someone else over him. He's got a Gold Glove already under his belt in his rookie season. I think he came in with so much pressure and so much expectation. But now that Juan Soto's here, now that the attention's kind of diverting away from him, he's not under a huge microscope. The Yankees are kind of, becoming a more well-rounded team in general. Like, I think that there's a lot of ceiling that comes with Anthony Volpe. I know most projections have him around that 23 to 25 range, but I think when it comes to a higher upside play, a guy like Volpe is worth taking his over on stolen bases for. We've seen stolen base rate go up. We saw him get 24 last year with an above a 30% strikeout rate. So I'm expecting him to take a slight step forward at the very minimum. And if that's the case, he's getting on base more. I'm expecting him to finish in the stolen base range of around 30.
He's also the only guy in that roster with speed. It's the only one
Right.
you're going to let run. So somebody has to get their green light. My one concern with Soto MVP, if the Yankees fall out of it, if they're struggling, they could trade Juan Soto. They could trade him back to the National League, and you would just lose your ticket by virtue of him switching leagues. The Yankees, the way they've approached it, they signed Stroman, they added some depth in their outfield, got guys like Trent Grisham, extended their bullpen, but not signing Blake Snell, not signing Jordan Montgomery, not pushing all the chips in and saying, yes, we're going with a fortified roster, we're a World Series contender. Seems to me almost like they made the Soto move to say, all right, fans, calm down a little bit. We added Juan Soto, but then come trade deadline time, if they're out of it, they could absolutely flip Soto back for assets and reload that farm system. So the Yankees, to me, are in a good position at the deadline where they could buy, they could sell. I think Anthony Rizzo's due for a bounce back. He dealt with a concussion last year. I do like how they fortified this roster relative to last year, but if they're struggling, if this division is too tough for them, if they're, maybe considering moving on from this roster build that they've had in recent years, Soto is absolutely on the table, and he will have no shortage of suitors either.
It feels they've lacked creativity.
Yeah.
And having Volpe as just their one speed guy is a good note. And I'm glad you brought up Soto and where he is in the lineup. That's a big part of it, right? Especially if Judge is out. How does that affect things? So, I'm just pushing back a little bit just to try to paint the full picture. If Judge is out, then that changes the approach for pitching against Soto, right? At points.
Just having a second star in there is huge because there was a rolling 30-day period after Judge went out last year where the Yankees were a bottom 3 offense in baseball. They weren't doing anything at the plate, and that was largely what tanked their season. Is once Judge went out, they were a completely different team. You put it back in there, and everybody seemed to be, locked in and hitting better than they were without him in the lineup. So having another superstar as a backup in case you do lose one is certainly beneficial. But yeah, I think Rizzo's due for a bounce back. Glaber is still a very solid player. I'm not really sure about Alex Verdugo, and he's also a bit of a clubhouse issue. And the bottom of the
Sure.
lineup, Stanton, always a problem. So they have better defensive backups. I think Trent Grisham, if a guy like Judge goes down, Grisham's at least going to give you good defense. They have younger kids, Peraza, Cabrera, who I think are capable of improving. So, like I said, it's a better Yankees roster than the team they had
Right.
last year, but it's still a very similar build. It's still this top-heavy, power-laden, high upside team, but with a lot of downside and a low floor as well. I mean, Carlos Rodon is kind of the key to whether they're a contender or not.
Yeah.
If Rodon is at the level he was 2 years ago, the Yankees are a serious contender. If he's not, they really only have one elite starter and then a bunch of number 3s and 4s.
And Rizzo had the whole concussion, was playing through it, then not. I mean, I think that played a huge role into his, struggles. And then when Aaron Judge goes sideline and you have a guy who can barely see the baseball, it's going to lead to some Yankee struggles altogether. But you bounce back on a healthy Rizzo and him doing better. You have Judge, you have Glaber, you have an actual top lineup where then Soto just slides right in, leads to, he gets on base. That's what the guy does. I think he'll swing more and a higher on base percentage, more runs scored. I think it all translates to, and like you said, right? Like I think a lot of this is also narrative. Like if the Yankees make the playoffs and Juan Soto has a great season and he's comparable with Aaron Judge, I think that the media might side more with Juan Soto than Judge, just because Judge has been there. Judge has put up the monstrous season, but Soto comes in from San Diego, comes to New York, puts them in the playoffs, which they couldn't do with this all-star season. That's where I kind of lean.
Sure.
So that's why I'm sprinkling on him.
The last thing I want to mention, I think Juan Soto is super overvalued in the home run leader market. I've seen very short prices on him there. He doesn't hit the ball in the air enough, and he does not pull the ball enough, nor does he swing enough. He's going to need a complete change in approach if he wants to pop 40, 45 home runs. Yeah. Maybe he takes advantage of the short porch. Maybe he starts lifting and pulling the ball more and swinging more often, but it's going to require a complete overhaul to his approach that we haven't seen in the past. And frankly, him doing that is already baked into the numbers. I mean, betting him at 12-1, 15-1 to win the home run leader. If he was 50-1, absolutely interested in speculating that. But at 15-1, 20-1, there's no value.
Right.
Walked 132 times and 162 last year for San Diego, and he struck out a ton too, second most in his career since his early days in Washington. The Baltimore Orioles are the second favorite in the division. This has been a team that's been talked about a lot from a win total perspective, and that number just keeps dipping down. Now it's in the high 80s. You're seeing 89.5. I think Zerillo, when we did the offseason episode, you gave out a better number on the Orioles. So that just tells you in the last handful of weeks, the Orioles win total has been coming down. People are betting that under. Charlie, you haven't had a chance to weigh in, though, on one of these forums, the Payoff Pitch podcast. Yeah. The Baltimore Orioles, are you shaky on this team too? And I mean shaky based on what the market's providing.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Baltimore already does not like me for my comments last season, but I also think that the under has a lot of value here. I think there's still a 90.5, at least maybe a 91 flat in the market, and I like to zig while everyone's zagging. They obviously overperformed last year, and there's a lot that goes into it, and then we've just seen this laundry list of injuries kind of start piling up, right? Bradish has a partial UCL tear and is rehabbing back. He's going to start the year on the IL. They're hoping to avoid surgery, but we have no idea if he's going to come back to his full potential, if he's going to re-injure that elbow. And he is and plays a pivotal role in this rotation. And as much as you get with adding a guy like Corbin Burns, who can kind of patch up at that top end, you look at the rest of the rotation. John Means is already starting on the IL. He's always hurt. Dean Kramer is your starting pitcher 3. Cole Irvin is going to back end your rotation. I mean, like these are a lot of problems in a division where, like we've talked about, we could see 4, maybe even the Red Sox make a run at that crown, and you're expecting them to go, 90 and 72, 92 and 70. You look at just the projections on the market, like Bacota's at 87, Fangraphs and Davenport are at the mid 80s. I think that that's roughly where they should be given the level of talent that they're going to face in the American League East, where I think the Yankees improved. I think the Rays are completely undervalued, and we'll get into that. The Blue Jays are about the same team as they were last year. The Red Sox should see improvement. There's no Felix Bautista. The bullpen should regress. And Craig Kimbrell, if he's in the back end of that bullpen, we know how many times that he is prone to blowing a lead. So I love their under on their wins here. I think that this is a complete fade the public play. And then I'll let Zerillo kind of dive into it a bit more, but do also love which is funny. I'm all over their under, but also Grayson to win the Cy Young. I mean, if you look at the second half of the season, his numbers, he was in the top 5 of, just about every important metric, and will have such a high ceiling. And we were all over for Rookie of the Year last year. Didn't quite work out that way. Went down to the minors, and since he came back, he's been stellar. So I think a 30-1 long shot play is in order for Grayson.
I recall some August and September daily episodes last year where you both were, I think Tabundo was doing this too, hinting at the idea of Grayson Rodriguez to be a Cy Young candidate for this season. Zerillo, you have thoughts on that?
The ceiling is just so high, and the size, he's everything you want from a pitcher. 6'5", 230. He has the build, the velocity, the stuff. After he returned from the minors last year, 4th in stuff plus, and 2.5 ERA, over the final 3 months of the season. He's also in the innings range where I expect him to progress to 180 to 200 innings in 2024. So you need about 180 innings or more if you want to contend for a Cy Young, if you want to be in the conversation. No questions about Grayson getting the innings this season, especially with the Orioles bullpen potentially reduced. I think Adley Rutschman is an MVP candidate as well. So it's a bit odd that I like the under on the Orioles, considering I'm betting one guy for MVP, one guy for Cy Young, and view them as a team with tons of offensive depth. But the division is so tough. And you look at the projections, 85.3 or 83.5, should say, from Fangraph Zips, 83.5 wins from Zips, 86.7 for Pacoda, 85 from Davenport. I'm at about 86 wins. That win total opening up at 91.5, even before the Kyle Bradish injury, way too high. I think this is bettable down to about 90.5, even 89.5 compared to where that public projection is. There's also value on the Orioles to miss the playoffs. I'm less inclined to play that because I think there's still a team that potentially goes out and signs Montgomery or signs Blake Snell. Just acquired Corbin Burns after changing ownership. Fans clamoring for them to go out and get Jordan Montgomery to solidify the back end of this rotation with Bradish getting hurt. Cole Irvin's velocity up in spring training. I actually think he's the guy who's going to take the step forward, but there's downside in the back end of that rotation and in the back end of their pitching. They're absolutely loaded top to bottom in terms of hitting talent. Jackson Holliday projects as the best rookie on a per plate appearance basis in terms of wins above replacement. Not sure he's going to start the season on opening day. He had a great day yesterday in spring. So seems like it's trending that direction, that Holliday might be on the opening day roster at 19, 20 years old, extremely young. And, for any of their corners, Austin Hayes, Santander, Mountcastle, they have all these young kids, Kauser, Kobe Mayo, Heston Kierstad, who seem like they're actually potentially better players and better hitters. And even if these guys don't get hurt, they may just get displaced because these guys are better. So if I were running the Orioles, I would be taking the guys on the Major League roster, your Mountcastles, your Santanders, and trying to extract value from them into pitching. You're solidifying that bullpen, getting younger relief pitchers who are controllable, getting younger starting pitchers who are controllable, and maybe not getting 100 cents on the dollar, but turning over my roster and re-solidifying my pitching staff because their offensive depth is so phenomenal. So for me, the Orioles, I absolutely see the argument for why this team is so good, but you can't play all of these guys at the same time. And allocating those at-bats is something they need to figure out. Optimizing this roster is something they haven't fully done yet. So yes, I see the talent throughout it. I see the number one farm system or whatever they have. They're absolutely loaded. They just can't play 14 guys on the field at the same time. They're never going to have a below average bat in the lineup. But that said, I only think it helps your pitching so much when you have all this offensive depth. Right. So the Orioles under, they're just not built correctly. Their roster's not optimized. They were also extremely lucky last season. +7 in Pythagorean win differential. Would have won 87 games if you flip the result of every one-run game. And as Charlie and I have said, their bullpen is not going to be as good as it was last season. So Orioles under, I think still worth betting, down to about 89.5, 88, or 89.5, 89. But Grayson will win the Cy Young at 30-1. Love that, down to about 20-1. And Adley, if you can get 25-1 or better on MVP, I would basically bet that every year. They just try to stick him in the lineup every day, rotate him through the DH spot, let him play first base, make sure he gets 150 games. So Adley, they stuff him in the lineup every day, and he should have the good counting stats, not to mention the defensive WAR from catching.
There is so much to pick apart from this division, and the first argument that you both have put this into your points on these first two teams is the challenges of playing each other in the division. Granted, less division games than normal than previous years, like we hit on a lot last year, but it seems that the Yankees have less to work with depth-wise. The Orioles do. So if there are injuries, that's a good sign, but they don't really have a direction with all these young guys. And maybe they are more inclined to, if they're kind of middle of the pack or they're in the hunt, maybe they say to themselves, well, maybe we can go add another pitcher, or they sign Montgomery. Like you said, he's definitely a possibility, but it's murky. And that brings us to the Blue Jays, because they haven't really changed all that much. Plus 450 to win the division. Win totals at 87.5. They're just kind of there, which Zerillo, correct me if I'm wrong, you were pretty high on the Blue Jays last season to come out of the division in the American League East.
So that was 2 years ago. I bet the Blue Jays World Series. I was all over that. But yeah, they really feel like kind of the same team. And they lost Matt Chapman. They were in the hunt for Ohtani. Putting Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Ohtani in Toronto would have been fun. They also could have called Yamamoto the YYZ, which would have been incredible.
That was when the where is Ohtani discussion was happening. That's right.
People were tracking planes like Taylor Swift flying back from Japan to get to the Super Bowl. Yeah, it was really out of hand. But I mean, Toronto hasn't really moved the needle much for me in either direction. And frankly, I don't see value on them. If anything, divisional odds as high as plus 475. There's projections out there that would justify a poke on that. If you like Toronto more than the market, that's how I'd play them. But other than that, I don't really see value on this team in, making the playoffs, their win total over, under, etc. I essentially align with the betting market, the projection market, which puts them anywhere between 83 and 88 wins. The one bet I do have on Toronto, Jordan Romano to lead the league in saves at 23-1. Had a back injury last year, but in terms of how I handicap the saves leader market, guys who have full control over their role when they are healthy, who also project for 30 or more saves this season, Romano really stood out with two other pitchers on the leaderboard. So that's the only player prop I have for Toronto this upcoming season. But, we're going to evaluate teams as we get into the season, see how they're playing, see if there's things we like. What if Alek Manoah looks right back to his old form and looks great? That certainly upgrades the Blue Jays for me. So things I want to take a look at as we get deeper into the season. They are a great defensive team too. That's certainly worth calling out. They built themselves to have a really strong defensive outfield last year with Varsho and Kiermaier, and it played out in that way. Matt Chapman leaving the roster really hurts their defensive infield value because that was where they struggled last season. He was the one guy who really shined out. Chapman Guerrero has gotten much better defensively too, but first base doesn't help you as much as third, second, and short.
Manoah looks good. Manoah lost some weight. Best shape of his life, maybe. We hear that all the time this time of year.
He was just, he's odd because he had that great season and, he's fun. He was really cool in the All-Star game when he was mic'd up. He has big stuff, but the underlying metrics, the stuff plus the advanced indicators said he was much worse than the way he was performing 2 years ago, and obviously fell off of a cliff last season. Nobody expected that, but he was always kind of projecting closer to a league average pitcher than an ace. So it was really interesting to see the drastic fall off.
Okay. Charlie, you had a quick thought here on the Blue Jays? We're not going to spend a ton of time on them.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think like Sean said, I think they're a mid-season wait and see and then maybe bet team. Like this is a team that has so many question marks in their pitching. Bassett's 35, Barrios is hit or miss, Kikuchi's hit or miss, Manoah, who the hell knows? So, their offense should still be solid. Vladdy, Bobichette, guys like Springer, they all should still be, top of the line hitters. But I think it's a wait and see with them. The one long shot that I do have out of this team is Vladdy to lead the league in hits at, I think it's like 70-1 still. He's projected top 5 by the Bat X. ATC has him 9th. And I think the one thing that I love when I have this Vladdy future and looking to bet this market is that he has durability. And in each of the last 3 seasons, he's had 156 plus games played. In the COVID year, he played every single game. So, when you want to bet a market, you want to bet on a guy that doesn't have like the wonky injury history, that has the durability. A guy like Vladdy will most likely be able to, put on a 155, 150 plus game workload. And then you look at his just numbers. He's 90th in strikeout percentage as far as a percentile goes, 96th in expected batting average. Last year, he had a 277 BABIP which is his lowest in his entire career, despite all these, metrics, underlying metrics really saying that he was playing well at the plate. His expected batting average was up at 299. So some positive regression possibly coming for Vladdy. I could easily see him in the coming race to, in the top 5 for hits. So at 70-1, he's down at like 20th or 25th. I just think that there's some value here in taking a long shot on a guy who should play the entire season versus a lot of the other guys at the top kind of have some wonky injury history that could lead to some missed time.
One other prop I should shout out, Chris Bassett, wins leader at 80-1. He's actually tied for the major league lead with 31 wins over the past 2 seasons and projects, top 8 in terms of wins this year. So pitches really deep into games, not one of the elite pitchers, but just eats a lot of innings and is going to get a number of decisions as a result. Tied with Verlander for wins over the past 2 seasons. Pretty impressive.
The home road splits jumped out with him last year too. He was great at home, but could not pitch away from Canada. So maybe
that's typically the case with Jose Barrios too, and that held up in Minnesota. I don't know if like the Blue Jays are intentionally targeting these guys who have big home road splits, but something weird in the water in Toronto.
Okay, so I'm sensing Charlie might, to use an NFL comp, maybe the Blue Jays are like this past year's Buffalo Bills, where you can get a big juicy number and bet them to win the whole thing if the value presents itself and they're getting healthy and Vlad is Josh Allen and just carries a load. Tampa Bay Rays. And by the way, I'm just going back a bit. That number on Baltimore being down mid-80s, barely mid-80s, 83.5 at Fangraphs for a projected win total. Wow.
Yeah.
Crazy. Sorry. I meant to say that earlier. The Tampa Bay Rays, surprise, Pacoda's got him at 87.1 wins this year. So there's a lot of 87s to 89s in this division. The Yankees in the low 90s. Zerillo, you've got strong thoughts on Tampa, but why? Like, because Tampa's sort of that underdog darling every year, but why this year? No more Glasnow. We know that in Los Angeles with the Dodgers. What's the angle on Tampa?
Yeah, no more Glasnow, but they're going to turn Ryan Pepiot into their new Glasnow. I mean, this team always unlocks new pitching. They're better at developing pitching and relievers than basically anybody else. They acquire guys in season who are performing horribly and turn their seasons around. But it's also they're consistently the most underprojected organization. The past 5 years, they've had an average preseason win total of 85.3. They finished with an average of 94 wins. So have exceeded their preseason projections or preseason win total by 9 games. And looking at the composite projection versus the actual wins, it's, one season they were basically in line. Every other season they exceeded it by 10 games or 14 games. So it's really 1 year that they weren't drastically above expectations, and every other year they drastically exceed expectations. Defensive value, something that doesn't get baked into projections as much, that I think they are consistently great at, and also managing their depth and never having below average players on their roster, constantly plugging holes with league average players. Even the last move that they made, the last addition that they made of the offseason, getting Amed Rosario in there because they probably don't want Junior Caminero on their opening day roster. And I think Junior Caminero, by the way, going to be a valuable AL Rookie of the Year candidate when he does come up. And I would take better numbers on him after he gets recalled, probably 4 or 5 weeks into the season after that Super 2 deadline. But the Rays have a ton of depth, and that is always the case. And even though to the common baseball fan, to the average baseball fan, the names may not jump off the page relative to the stars in these other teams in this division, the talent is there. And I actually think their position player group is the best they've had in quite some time. Having Lowe and Lau and Arena and Yandy Diaz and Paredes, and then you potentially mix in Caminero later in the season. If Jose Siri keeps hitting, there's really not that many holes in this lineup. Top to bottom, this is one of the best position player groups and most reliable position player groups they've had in some time. They're also going to get 2 of their best pitchers back potentially in the second half. Drew Rasmussen and Jeffrey Springs on a timeline where they make return closer to a playoff run. And Shane Baz, who's one of my favorite pitchers over the last couple of years, favorite pitching prospects. He's been rehabbing after Tommy John for well over a year now. So not a typical guy who's coming back from Tommy John at 100 or at less than 100% effectiveness. When Baz hits the Rays rotation off of a Tommy John recovery, he should be at the timeline where he's back near 100% because he's had extended time to recover. So Tampa Bay is pitching to me just as loaded as ever. Maybe losing Glasnow, kind of scares people off from them being a World Series contender, but that's how they were viewed the past couple of years. And frankly, aside from Glasnow, there's not that much difference in this roster.
I've heard that before, with a top end arm that leaves and they just still find a way to pump out another prospect to make an impact.
Nobody better at it.
Nobody, and the win total's at 84.5 for those wondering. So, and that note, Zerillo, last 5 years is a good one.
Charlie, I have them at I have them at 89, so I'm definitely higher than the market, but the public consensus is about 85 to 87. So everybody likes them to go over. Would probably take it up to about 85.
Charlie, you like the over on the Rays?
Yeah, no, I mean, everything that Zerillo said, I echo. I mean, Kevin Cash is somehow always finding a way to overperform here. And what I was going to say was about the offense. And it's like, oh, you look at this team and maybe they don't have any of the superstar names, but they were number 2 in WRC plus last year. And then you're like, oh, well, they don't have, Wander Franco anymore. When he left, they were still 6th in WRC plus. So this offense is still hitting despite not having their quote unquote, one of their superstars who won't be with the team. And then you look at every metric projected over, you look at their rotation, it is still strong with I like Zach Eflin. I like Taj Bradley to take a step forward. I love Ryan Pepio. I liked him. I kept betting him last year too when he was pretty undervalued despite being on LA. And then, like Zerillo said, a World Series future. I bet 45 to 1 yesterday. Having Rasmussen, Springs, and Shane all coming back at some point to gear up for a postseason run. You put that together with what they already have in Eflin, Savali, Pepio, Bradley, and the bullpen. I trust Kevin Cash to get the job done, and I trust this team. And when you look at this roster, they're a very formidable roster, and I think that we're getting a bit of a discount given the fact that the Orioles overperformed last year, that the Yankees always come in with high expectations, but no one ever talks about Tampa. So yeah, I'm all in on the Rays going over as well.
Let's hit the Red Sox quickly. We don't need to spend a lot of time on this team. Lucas Giolito just got hurt, and he's probably done for the year. He was supposed to start opening day. That's feel bad for the player. Allowed 41 home runs last year. That's your opening day starter. I'm a Boston guy, as you both know, so I'm down on this team. I was all into the over 76.5, 77.5 last year, and win total opens at 80.5. And I think most of the people in this market here in Boston were like, oh, let's take a look at that under. Tristan Casas breakout year last year. They still have Devers. This Red Sox team, that could be a disaster, a real disaster. Zerillo, you have an angle on the Boston Red Sox.
I don't know if they're going to be a disaster. I really like Nick Pivetta. I really like Bayo. I really like Cutter Crawford. So that's a pretty good start with your top 3 starters in terms of guys who I think are all better than their projections and better than the projection market. I think Nick Pivetta actually has a chance to lead the league in strikeouts this year. That may sound crazy. Probably sounds crazy, right? I don't think he's ever surpassed 200 strikeouts in his career. Nick Pivetta in the second half of last season had a 35% strikeout rate. He finally figured out his pitch mix. And I think Nick Pivetta may be a Cy Young contender in 2024. I haven't bet it yet. Probably going to bet it before opening day. I mean, if you combine his second half strikeout rate with his 2022 workload, Nick Pivetta strikes out 270 batters. Spencer Strider struck out 274 last season. It's there. The signs are there that Nick Pivetta finally unlocked what he's been looking for forever. I know he's 31 years old. He wouldn't be the first pitcher to hit his stride and hit his peak in his 30s. Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer. Nick Pivetta has been working on a pitch mix forever, experimenting with different pitch mixes forever. I think he finally found it in the second half of last season. Pitched as well basically as anybody in baseball over the second half. So Nick Pivetta in terms of fantasy for 2024, strikeout leader at 100 to 1. Cy Young is probably 200 to 1, 180 to 1. I think Nick Pivetta definitely worth poking from some long shot perspectives. The safer guy in this roster, obviously Rafael Devers. I think Devers is an RBI leader bet every single year at 25 to 1 or better. Just score a ton of runs in this Red Sox lineup and at Fenway. Wish he was probably hitting 3rd or 4th for this bet instead of 2nd, just so you get slightly more RBI opportunities. But 25 to 1 every year on Devers always shows up as projected value for me. You mentioned Casas. Brennan, I like Casas as a home run leader for 2025. But, you're getting 180 to 1 this season. I think at his peak, Tristan Casas potentially passes the 50 home run mark, especially if he starts pulling the ball more and starts hitting regularly against lefties. I think Casas is in for a big year. Love his power metrics. Love how he has power all over the yard. You look at his home run spray chart and he's hitting balls out all over the yard. So the power clearly carries, but I think if he harnesses it more into pull power, he's really going to take off and surpass that 40 home run mark. But in terms of, bets on the team, there is value on the Red Sox to miss the playoffs at minus 350. Not something I'm going to lay, but there is something you can project in terms of there being actionable value on it. If you can parlay it up with other things, that might be the way I would go about it. But this division is too tough. And really, I project Boston, is a second best team if they were in the AL Central, but the division they're in, it's just going to be tough for them to surpass 80 wins.
Whew, I was going to say, you were really taking a swim in that dirty water, man. You finally came around. But you gave me some hope there, Charlie.
Stats bad team guys, those still exist. Not just an NBA thing. You could still put up a lot of volume on a bad team in baseball.
Okay. Well, hey, if Casas has a breakout year, that might be just fun to follow, that individual story. The Nick Pivetta thing, that's fascinating.
Pavetta's second half numbers are shocking. I think he's really poised to become a big time pitcher. Not sure what his contract situation is, but he may become a serious trade chip for them as well.
All right, Charlie, let's wrap with the Red Sox. Then we'll do our final bets, our favorite bets from the division.
Yeah, Zerillo's got me looking up Pivetta stats right now because that's a very interesting look. I'm a bit high on the Red Sox, but I won't be obviously placing a bet on them. I'd rather bet on the Rays and the Orioles under here, just because the Rays over Orioles under, just because of how hard this division is. I'm not going to have 3 win totals, but I do think that like Zerillo said, I like Devers to lead the league in RBIs. And then I also like him to have over 31.5 home runs this year. If you look out there in the market, the rest of them, there's majority of them are at 33.5. There is a place out there that has 31.5, and that's a number that Devers has cleared in 3 of the 4 seasons, not counting COVID, which is a 75% hit rate, projected to be at 34 to 35 by just about every single metric or projections outlet. So, and then just the RBI stuff, he's been top 10 in 2 of the last 5 years, 100 plus in 3 of the 5. So there's going to be volume there. I think the Red Sox offense as a whole takes a step forward. Obviously, it's just a little bit more difficult in this division to translate more offense into success. But, I like that Devers angle. And then Jarren Duran, he had 24 stolen bases last season. His total right now is 26.5. He left yesterday with a foot injury, so that's worth monitoring. But based on reports, he's going to be in the lineup on Thursday. So as long as he's healthy, which I'll be, monitoring over the next week or so, his over 26.5 stolen bases is pretty undervalued. He had 24 in 101 games last year. So that's 1 every 4.2. He hits obviously leadoff. So him getting on base and then stealing second for whoever it is, Devers, Casas, whoever to hit him home is definitely always viable, and he's one of the fastest guys in baseball. So you look at projection metrics, he's right around 28 to 30 range. So like taking a stab on his over and taking advantage of the increase in stolen bases. I think him and Volpe, as I mentioned earlier, provide value based on just their elite speed alone.
Yeah, and I've said on other podcasts, I think steal attempts are actually going up more this season. The stolen base success rates were so high last year. I think teams are going to press on the gas pedal even more. The Reds last year attempted like 30 more steals than any other team. So I have Ellie in my home run or my stolen base leader article that, came out today. But just take a look at which teams were running very aggressively last year and expect everybody to bump it up a little bit this season.
Yeah. And it's not a great running division. You noted 2 guys individually, Yankees and Red Sox, but that's a preview for other division previews as far as the running game, how that could impact.
Yeah, those 2 guys just have elite speed, right? Like Volpe stealing 24 with a 280 on base percentage is pretty nuts. And then Duran having 24 in 101 games or whatever it was, assuming that he doesn't get hurt again and miss 60 games, he should get in the 30s.
A quick heads up, the great state of North Carolina is launching sports betting this Monday, March 11th. So if you're in the Tar Heels state, take advantage of the best sign-up offers across every sports book. You can find a link to every one of those offers in the description of this episode, right there for you. All the North Carolina offers, all in one place. Just check out the link in the episode description. All right, let's wrap it up. Rapid fire with final bets. We'll do a favorite win total bet from each of you in the AL East, stat leader award bet, and then your best bet, which could be a repeat, whatever it may be. So Zerillo, let's start. Win total in the American League East.
Yeah, favorite win total, the Rays over. Everybody says to go over. Stat leader, I'm actually going to go with Zach Eflin to lead the league in wins at 100-1. Not one I mentioned, but how I project starters, quality starts, wins. He projects closer to a guy who should be 40-1 or 50-1, not 100-1. Awards, Grayson Rodriguez, AL Cy Young, 30-1. My favorite bet, maybe for all awards in the American League. And then I should just mention the correlated bets, on the Rays is my best bets for the division. Anyway, you could bet the Rays, the over, obviously. But to make the playoffs at plus 150, maybe the best way to bet them of the bunch. To win the AL East at plus 800, absolutely think there's value on that. Project that number closer to plus 400 or plus 450. And then finally, to win the World Series at 45-1. This is a team who I think is going to be better later in the season than they are at the start of the season. Once Curtis Meade comes up, once Junior Caminero comes up, once they get those pitchers back off of the IL, I think the Rays have enough depth to win 85 games, but I also think they're going to be a team who's getting even better down the stretch. So Tampa Bay, the team I'm on in the East this year.
Charles, win total, stat leader or award, and your best bet for the American League East.
Yeah, my favorite win totals, the Orioles under. Just think that, lack of pitching right now is going to weigh large in what is such a difficult division. Favorite stat leader, Vladdy to lead the league in hits, durability, and positive regression equals success. I think he'll find himself in the top 5 there. Award, I'll echo Zerillo with Grayson Rodriguez to win the Cy Young. Think all the stuff's there. It's just a matter of putting it all together, which he seemed to do in the second half of last season. And then best bet, if not including the stuff I talked about, maybe it's probably the Rays, but also I really love Anthony Volpe over 24.5 stolen bases. I think he's going to have an on-base percentage, above 300 this year, which with the increased stolen base attempts, with him already having 24 last year in a down season and being the only guy with speed on the roster, I think the Yankees are going to kind of let him run loose. And we should see that number kind of in the high 20s, low 30s. This
is just your Jersey bias coming out. You only like him.
I used to work out with Volpe back in the day, actually. Fun fact, but God. This has no bias with it. We would overlap.
Any video proof?
No, we would. My boy, I used to go to a trainer. His name's Mike Baker, and I would work out and I'd finish, and then Volpe would come in and hit the squat rack and would squat like 600 pounds, and I would be like I gotta go home, whatever. Like this guy is like 19 years old, just got drafted by the Yankees, and here I am just trying to lose some weight, and Volpe's putting up 600 on the squat rack.
Were you just staring at his quad? Wow,
dude,
this guy can
yeah, no, dude. I mean, the dude was built like a truck, so yeah.
That's great. You should tell him when he hits the over on his stolen bases in September.
Hey, Volpe.
You should,
hey, Volpe.
Do an off-season training program with him.
The Anthony Volpe, Tommy DeVito crossover that we all need.
Exactly.
On that note, that'll do it for this episode of Payoff Pitch, our American League East preview presented by BetMGM. Make sure you download the free award-winning Action Network app if you haven't done so already to follow all of our experts. And it's a way for you to track your own picks. If you're in North Carolina and excited to do some baseball betting, make sure you check out the link in the episode description. Please rate, review, and subscribe to catch all of our division previews here on Payoff Pitch. For Sean Zerillo, Charlie DiSturco, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Payoff Pitch, Action Network's MLB betting podcast.